There are places in this world where the earth itself seems to breathe, where silence weighs heavier than any sound, and where shadows do not follow, but lead. Deep in Japan lies a forest that does not simply hide its secrets, it keeps them. Every footprint that enters may never return. Every whisper among its branches may be a soul it has claimed, and every shadow might belong to someone who is no longer alive. Tonight, you will step into that forest, and once you do, you may never look at your own shadow the same way again. There's a place in Japan where the earth does not keep its promises. A place where footsteps sink into the soil, but the person who made them does not remain. It is a forest too vast to hold in a single gaze, a canopy so thick that sunlight falls in fragments, as though even the sky itself fears to be seen there. For centuries, its name has carried whispers of sorrow and fear, but in modern times, it has gained another title. The forest where shadows move on their own. It begins, as such stories often do, with something ordinary. A group of friends, young hikers who love the thrill of chasing landscapes untouched by city noise, arrive on the edge of the forest one late autumn morning. The air was damp, heavy with the promise of rain. The villagers nearby warned them not to stray too deep, though the warning was wrapped in polite words and uneasy smiles. They did not speak directly of vanishing, but of paths that betray, of trees that do not end, of strange feelings that stir the mind until it collapses into despair. The hikers laughed off the warnings. The city had hardened them, trained them to treat superstition as little more than background noise. They stepped beneath the canopy, their boots sinking into leaves thick as carpet. None of them could have known that their footprints would be the last trace left behind. Days later, when they did not return, the search began. At first, there was little panic. It was not unusual for hikers to lose track of time or to camp an extra night without warning. But as the second day slipped into the third, worry spread like wildfire. The forest was wide, the terrain treacherous, and night within its depths was said to be darker than a cave. Volunteers, police, even seasoned rangers joined the effort. Dogs were brought to catch their scent. Helicopters circled above. At last, they found something. A trail of footprints in the mud. 5 sets, clear as though stamped only hours before. They began at a well-worn path and continued deeper into the wilderness. Relieved, the rescuers followed them, believing they had finally discovered the hikers' route. Yet as the trail stretched further, something odd revealed itself. The prints did not wander or hesitate as a lost travelers would. They were steady, measured, as though the hikers walked in silence, side by side, unwavering. Then the strangest detail of all, the footprints ended, not at a clearing, not at a river, not at a cliff. They simply stopped mid-stride, as though the 5 hikers had lifted into the air and vanished. One step existed, pressed deep into the earth, but there was no next step to follow it. Confusion rippled through the rescuers. They scoured the ground, searching for signs of struggle, broken branches, drag marks, anything. But there was nothing. Only those last prints, frozen in mud, pointing into nothingness. Whispers began among the volunteers. Some suggested the hikers had been swept away by sudden fog, that they wandered off elsewhere. Others spoke more quietly, recalling tales they had heard as children. Tales of shadows that lingered longer than the people who cast them. Tales of a forest that devours. Still, the search continued. The team pushed deeper, their flashlights cutting through thickening mist as evening drew close. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the air became. Even the dogs grew uneasy, whining at places where there was nothing to see. Silence pressed down like a weight, broken only by the crunch of boots on damp leaves. Then one of the rescuers, a man seasoned by years of mountain work, froze in place. His breath caught, and his hand shook as he lifted the beam of his flashlight toward the trees. "I saw it," he whispered. "Something moved." The others looked where he pointed. Nothing but trunks, black and still. "No," he said more urgently. "Not someone. They're shadows. Against the light." The rescuers turned in uneasy silence. Light played across the trees, carving shapes that swayed with the mist. But none of them saw what he described. Only he insisted that the shadows had shifted independently, sliding across the bark while their sources stood frozen. The tension of his words lingered, poisoning the air. No one wanted to admit they felt it too, that strange sense that something unseen was watching, pressing closer. Night came down like a curtain. They set up temporary camp, though few dared to close their eyes. The forest did not sleep, even if it pretended to. Branches creaked without wind. Shapes flickered at the edge of vision. And the man who swore he had seen shadows moving did not rest at all. He kept the beam of his flashlight steady on the trees, muttering that if he blinked, something would step closer. By dawn, he was gone. His sleeping bag lay empty. His flashlight lay in the dirt, still switched on, its beam pointing into the trees. And around it, in the soft earth, the rescuers found footprints. Not his. Dozens of them, pressed deep as though by heavy steps, circling the camp. And yet, none of the team had heard a sound in the night. Panic grew. Some wanted to leave at once. Others refused, determined to uncover what had happened to both the hikers and now their fellow rescuer. Arguments broke out, each voice echoing strangely, as though the forest amplified every word. One woman noticed something chilling. The footprints circling the camp had no toes, no heel marks. They were hollow outlines, shapes like shadows imprinted on the earth. The team broke into silence. The weight of the forest deepened. Fear became a living thing among them. Some clutched charms, others muttered prayers under their breath. They pressed forward, deeper still, desperate for an answer. Yet every step carried them closer to madness. Paths curved impossibly, bringing them back to the same fallen tree they had crossed an hour before. Rivers shifted, appearing in places they should not exist. Time stretched, minutes felt like hours. The forest had no map. Then came the discovery that silenced even their fear. A backpack, torn, muddied, half buried beneath leaves. Inside were a few personal belongings, a camera among them. They powered it on, hands trembling. The last images captured were ordinary at first, friends smiling, posing at the trail's entrance, the warmth of sunlight on their shoulders. But the final picture froze every breath in the rescuer's lungs. 5 hikers walking in a line, their faces half turned toward the camera, their expressions stiff. Behind them, stretching long across the ground, were their shadows. But each shadow leaned in a different direction, as though the light came from 5 different suns. And worse, one shadow was looking back. Not the hiker, but the shadow itself. Its head turned sharply toward the lens, though the person casting it faced forward. The shadow's eyes were hollow and dark, yet fixed, aware. The rescuers shut the camera at once. But in that moment, they understood why the footprints had ended mid-stride. The hikers had not been taken by earth, nor by beasts. They had been claimed by something older, something that waits beneath the canopy, where light is broken and shadows do not obey. The search disbanded days later, some left in silence, some in tears. Reports filed with officials described only inconclusive evidence. The public heard little. Missing persons. Ongoing investigation. Nothing more. But those who had entered the forest carried the memory of it like a scar. The man who swore he saw shadows moving never returned. The woman who found the hollow footprints left the service altogether. And the rest avoided the forest's name as though speaking it would call the darkness closer. Yet the forest remains, still growing, still waiting, still hungry. The paths are there if you dare to follow. The air still swallows sound. And sometimes, when the mist thickens, a hiker's footprint appears on the trail. Fresh, damp, too new to have weathered. But no hiker is there to make it. The locals say the forest does not take the body first. It takes the shadow. Once the shadow steps away, the body follows, helpless as a puppet with its strings cut. That is why the footprints end mid-step. Because when the shadow leaves, the rest cannot continue. And the question lingers like an echo in every heart that hears this tale. If your shadow moved against you, turned to look with eyes not your own, what would you do? The forest waits for that answer. And this is only the beginning, for the footprints are just the first mark of its hunger. The whispers, the shadows, the endless paths, they are all threads leading deeper into secrets that have been buried for centuries. But those secrets are not meant to stay silent. The forest will speak again, and when it does, the world will know the truth. There are forests in the world that live like any other creature, growing, breathing, sheltering. But there are some that do more than live. Some remember, in Japan, there is one such forest, a place where the canopy itself is said to whisper. The villagers who dwell on its borders speak carefully when they mention it, as though the trees might hear them even from afar. They say it is not merely a forest of wood and soil, but a keeper of memory, a place that never forgets those who enter. It is a silence that unsettles the heart. Step beneath its leaves, and the air shifts in subtle ways. Every breath feels older, carrying the scent not just of moss and earth, but of something ancient, something that has lingered long after the world outside has moved on. The wind bends differently there. At times, the rustling of the canopy sounds not like branches swaying, but like voices too faint to be understood, voices that rise and fade as though in constant conversation. The people call it the whispering canopy. To some, it is only the poetry of superstition. To others, it is a warning carved into language itself. For those who believe, the whispers belong to the forest dead. It is said that anyone who loses their way within its depth does not vanish entirely. Their shadows remain anchored to the trees. Their essence, their regrets, their unfinished words are carried upward into the leaves, where they drift endlessly on the air. In this belief, the forest is not empty. It is heavy with memory, every branch bending beneath the weight of countless stories untold. Travelers who camp too long beneath the canopy speak of strange sensations. Some hear their names carried in the wind, soft and fragile, as if spoken by loved ones they lost long ago. Others dream of voices circling their sleep, voices that know their secrets, their fears, their hidden guilt. A few claim that the whispers are not random at all, but words spoken by those who walked before them, people whose bodies are long gone, but whose shadows never left. Among the oldest tales passed down through villagers is the legend of the Kagana, the shadow women. They are not women in the form one might expect, but silhouettes that drift across the ground, thin and tall, often mistaken for the shadows of trees until they begin to move. They are said to wander the forest at dusk, drawn to those who enter with restless hearts. According to the tales, they lure travelers deeper into the woods, whispering promises of comfort, of reunion with loved ones, or secrets long buried. Some say they appear with the face of someone the traveler once knew, someone they mourn still, beckoning them onward. But the embrace of Kagana is no embrace at all. Those who follow never return. The only sign left behind is the strange distortion of light, as though their shadow was pulled away from their body, stretched thin until the person it belonged to could no longer walk without it. Skeptics laugh at the thought, dismissing the stories as folklore born from fear of the unknown. Yet villagers still leave offerings on the forest's edge. Rice, salt, candles, small charms of rope tied in protective knots. These offerings are not for the forest itself, but for those who may still be wandering inside, their shadows tangled in the canopy above. The villagers say the forest remembers them, but someone must remember them here too, or they will grow bitter in their silence. One story is told more often than the rest. It is the tale of a woman named Ayam, who lived centuries ago in a village that has since been swallowed by time. She was said to have lost her husband to the wars of the Sengoku era, and every night she wandered the forest's edge, calling his name. One evening, she heard him answer. His voice drifted from within the trees, warm and clear, urging her to come closer. Against the pleas of her neighbors, she followed the sound into the depths. Days passed, but Ayam did not return. When the villagers searched, they found her footprints leading into the forest, steady and determined. At last, they ended at the base of an old cedar tree, but her body was never found. What they did find was her shadow. It was pressed against the trunk of the cedar, as though painted there in black. The villagers recoiled in terror. Her shadow was upright, her arms outstretched, her face tilted upward as though crying to the canopy itself. Even when the sun shifted, the shadow did not move. For years afterward, those who passed the cedar swore they heard a woman's voice calling from above, carried on the rustling of the leaves. Ayam's story became one of the first recorded whispers tied to the canopy. Some say she became one of the Kagana herself, forever wandering, forever luring others to the fate that claimed her. Others believe her soul was devoured, her essence bound into the endless whisper of the forest. Either way, her memory endures as proof to the locals that the forest is not merely a place of trees. It is a place of captivity. Centuries later, long after villages crumbled and new cities rose, hikers still vanished, and the whispers remained. Investigators who dared to linger at the edge of the forest brought back accounts that rattled even their skeptical peers. One man, a ranger assigned to search for a missing tourist, confessed that he heard his own daughter's voice in the trees. She had died years before, yet he swore the sound was hers. Every tone, every inflection. She called to him, begged him to come home. The ranger nearly stepped from the path before another member of his team stopped him. He resigned from his post the next day. But perhaps the most chilling artifact to emerge from the whispering canopy was not a footprint, not a shadow, but a diary. It belonged to a young man from Tokyo who had set out to hike the region alone. He was known for his love of journaling, and he carried a small leather-bound book to record his thoughts each evening. When he vanished, a team was sent to search. Weeks later, the diary was found beneath the roots of a twisted pine, its cover damp, but the ink still legible. The entries began with casual reflections. Notes on the beauty of the leaves, the serenity of the quiet paths. He remarked on how strange it felt to be so far from the noise of the city, how liberating it was to hear nothing but the rustle of wind. But as the pages turned, his words grew uneasy. He wrote of whispers at night, voices too faint to name. He dreamed of shadows standing near his tent, yet when he looked, nothing was there. He mentioned seeing movement in his periphery, as though someone was walking alongside him just out of sight. At one point, he described a shadow that seemed to walk without him, crossing the ground while he stood still. The final entry began shakily. He wrote that he had seen her, the Kageana. At first, he thought it was a woman standing ahead of him, her back turned. Her long hair hung like a curtain, her body slender, her presence strangely familiar. He called out, but she did not answer. When he approached, she moved, but her body did not bend the grass. Her form was dark against the fading light, a shape more absence than substance. He wrote that she turned her head slightly, just enough to let him see the hollow of her face. No features, no eyes, no mouth. Only the shape of a woman that should not exist. The final line ended mid-sentence. "It's following me." The words broke, the pen dragging across the page as if pulled from his hand. The diary was returned to his family, though many wished it had been destroyed. To this day, no one knows what became of him. But some believe his final entry was not merely a record. It was a warning, captured in ink before the forest took the last of him. And so the whispers continue. The canopy sways, and the voices rise with it. Some say they are only the wind. Others believe they are the lost, still calling out for someone to find them, someone to listen, someone to follow. The truth, perhaps, lies between. The forest does not forget. It carries every footstep, every cry, every unfinished word. And when the wind stirs the branches, the whispers remind us the shadows of the lost still move among the living. But what happens when one of those shadows finds its way out of the forest? That question lingers like a chill in the spine, unspoken yet undeniable. For if the forest remembers, then the shadows remember too. And memory is not always willing to remain silent. There are disappearances that leave behind broken branches, torn clothing, or desperate cries echoing through the trees. But the forest we speak of does not grant such traces. Its vanishings are different, cruel in their silence. Here, people are not devoured with violence, but erased, as if the very air decided they should no longer belong. No sound, no struggle, no final scream. Only absence, thick and suffocating, settling over the place where life once stood. The stories stretch across centuries, each one heavy with the same unbearable question: how does a human vanish without a sound? Long before hikers with backpacks and cameras walked the trails, it was the monks who spoke of the forest. Records tell of Buddhist ascetics who traveled there for solitude, seeking enlightenment in its endless stillness. Some returned with stories of visions, of voices carried in the wind that tested their resolve. Others did not return at all. Their temples waited, their villages prayed, but no bodies came back. Only silence. The monks' brothers would enter to search, leaving offerings of rice and incense at the roots of trees, whispering the lost names into the soil. Sometimes the forest returned an echo. Most times it did not. Centuries later, during the fires of war, soldiers marched through its shadows. Old reports buried in forgotten archives describe regiments that crossed its borders but never emerged. A full squad, 30 men strong, was once stationed in the forest's heart during a campaign. Weeks later, another unit arrived to relieve them. They found the camp intact, tents erected, weapons stacked, meals half prepared as though someone had been interrupted mid-bite. But the soldiers were gone. Not a trace, not even a drop of blood. Their boots remained. Their uniforms lay folded by sleeping mats. But the men themselves were erased, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than battle. Hikers came next. Young couples, seasoned travelers, lone adventurers chasing the thrill of untouched landscapes. Some vanished within days. Others lingered long enough to leave clues. One couple was discovered through their abandoned camp, sleeping bags unzipped, shoes neatly placed beside them. The fire pit still smoldered, but the two had vanished between one heartbeat and the next, as though the forest had exhaled and swallowed them whole. The strangest vanishings are those that happen in groups. Camps found with every sign of normal life, water boiling, journals open, belongings untouched, yet the people gone without a sound. It is as though the forest knows when more than one heart beats within its shadows, and it chooses not to take them separately, but together, as if plucking an entire moment from time. The villagers whisper theories, each darker than the last. Some believe the forest devours souls, leaving bodies behind only when it chooses. Others think those who vanish are still there, invisible, walking endlessly in circles that no living eye can see. Yet the most unsettling theory belongs not to villagers, but to detectives who studied the vanishings with scientific precision. One investigator, a man who spent years chasing the trail of missing hikers, noticed a pattern in the reports. Too many mentioned shadows. Not monsters, not spirits, but shadows. Shadows that moved strangely, stretched unnaturally, lingered too long after their owners had shifted. Survivors, the few who staggered back, spoke in hushed tones of seeing their shadows hesitate as they walked, or flicker as though caught in another rhythm of light. Some claimed their shadows stepped away entirely, walking along the path before vanishing into the underbrush. The detective built a theory both brilliant and terrifying, that the vanishings were not caused by the forest swallowing the body, but by the shadow severing itself. He wrote that a human being is not merely flesh and bone, but a union of light and darkness, and when the shadow detaches, the body cannot endure. It falters, collapses into silence, and vanishes along with the piece that was torn away. It was a theory laughed at by his peers, dismissed as the product of obsession. Yet the detective never wavered. He argued that shadows were not illusions of light, but tethered echoes of our very existence. They bind us to the world, and without them, we cannot remain. He died without convincing anyone, but his journals remain, and within them lie accounts too strange to dismiss entirely. One such account describes a man who returned from the forest raving that his shadow no longer obeyed him. He staggered through the streets, insisting that he saw it move when he was still, saw it glance when his head did not turn. Days later, he collapsed in a public square. By the time anyone reached him, he was gone. Not dead, not unconscious. Gone. Only his clothes remained. It is easy to believe these tales are exaggerations. The human fear births strange explanations for loss. Yet the forest provides evidence that resists dismissal. Camps untouched. Soldiers erased mid-meal. Hikers leaving footprints that end mid-stride. All of it ties to the same whisper. Shadows are not as loyal as we believe. The most chilling piece of evidence came not from myth or memory, but from a camera. A group of 3 hikers had set out in late spring, equipped with modern gear and recording devices. They vanished after 2 days. When rescuers searched, they found little, only scattered belongings near a clearing. Yet amid the leaves lay a camera, its screen cracked but still functioning. The rescuers powered it on. At first, the footage was unremarkable. The hikers laughing, pointing out landmarks, filming the beauty of the landscape. But as the hours passed, the tone shifted. They grew quieter, their glances sharper, as though something unseen pressed against their minds. By the second day, their smiles were gone. Their eyes flickered off into the trees. Then came the final footage. The camera rested on the ground, its angle tilted slightly upward. One hiker stood near the frame, adjusting his pack. Another moved behind him, speaking words too faint to hear. The third walked across the shot, glancing uneasily at the trees. Nothing unusual at first glance. But in the background, something shifted. At first, it appeared to be shadows cast by the men. But when slowed and studied, the movement revealed something impossible. The hikers moved one way, their shadows another. The blurred shapes on the ground stretched against their bodies, sliding, twitching as though breaking free. One shadow in particular peeled slightly from its owner, its head turning toward the camera, though the man's face never moved. The image blurred, the lens crackling with distortion before the footage ended abruptly. The rescuers who viewed it swore the shadows were alive. Officials who reviewed it dismissed the phenomenon as technical error, distortion from light, and damaged equipment. Yet those who stood in that clearing, those who felt the silence of that abandoned camp, knew otherwise. The vanishings had never been without cause. They had never been accidents or missteps in the wilderness. The forest held its own rules, and shadows were its enforcers. The camera was sealed away, locked in archives where few could see it again. But those who did carry its image like a weight on their soul. Blurred figures, blurred lives, and shadows that betrayed their owners. And the greatest horror of all is this. If a shadow can break free, what stops it from walking beyond the forest? The camera ended its story, but the forest has not. And this is where the whispers of loss become something darker. For the vanishings are not only in the past. They are not finished. They are waiting even now. The forest was not always a mystery to be solved by hikers, rangers, or detectives. Long before its name appeared in police reports and missing persons files, it was etched into the fabric of Japanese history itself. Its shadows did not wait for the modern world. They had already been known, already feared, already cursed. Hidden in forgotten temples, in the cracked parchment of old Buddhist scrolls, lies evidence that the forest was more than a wilderness. It was a prison, a place of punishment chosen not by chance, but by ritual. Monks of centuries past did not merely wander into it. They carried the condemned there. The scrolls tell of men and women who had been judged unworthy, whose sins weighed heavy upon their communities. Thieves, betrayers, oath breakers, and even warriors who abandoned their duties. Each of them was brought to the forest in solemn procession. They were not executed with sword or flame. Instead, the monks performed a ritual far darker, far stranger. They severed not the body, but the shadow. The texts are vague, written in a language heavy with metaphor and fear. Yet they describe circles drawn in ash, chants that bent the air, and candles that burned without flame. The sinner would kneel upon the earth as the monks invoked a power older than their own teachings. And in the final moment, the condemned would scream as their shadow detached, writhing on the ground like a living thing. Once cut away, the shadow did not vanish. It remained bound to the forest, drifting, restless, neither alive nor dead. The body of the sinner, stripped of its dark half, wandered aimlessly until hunger, despair, or the forest itself consumed it. Their voices, the monks believed, were carried upward into the canopy, where they lingered as whispers for eternity. This was the curse, to walk forever lost, nameless and broken, while one shadow lived on, mocking the flesh it once belonged to. The villagers surrounding the forest knew of these rituals. They feared the monks as much as they feared the trees. For them, the forest was not a place of enlightenment or solitude. It was a place where humanity could be stripped apart. They avoided it, built their homes at a distance, and when their children wandered too close, they warned them with stories of Kagana and hungry shadows. Yet the forest stood at the edge of war. During the violent centuries of feudal conflict, armies clashed across Japan, their battles carving scars into the land. Feudal lords sought territory, resources, power. They expanded their domains ruthlessly, yet curiously, they left this forest untouched. Records show that warlords would march their troops to its border, but they did not set camp within its depths. They marched around it, stretched their supply lines wide to avoid it. Even in times of desperation, when rice was scarce and forests elsewhere provided refuge, they left this one alone. It was not cowardice that held them back. It was knowledge. They had heard the stories of monks and their rituals, and they had no wish to leave their shadows behind. Still, battle found its way to the forest's edge. Accounts speak of warriors slain beneath its trees, arrows piercing the canopy, and blood staining its soil. Some say their screams echoed longer than they should have, carried deep into the woods, where they never ceased. Others claim to see fallen soldiers rise again, their bodies empty but their shadows alive, drifting into the depths like smoke. Perhaps the most haunting record comes from the writings of a samurai retainer who described a skirmish near the forest during the 16th century. He wrote that in the chaos of combat, several of his men broke rank and fled into the woods. Their cries could be heard for a time, but then fell silent. When he later searched the trees for their bodies, he found none. Only shadows pressed flat against the trunks, stretched tall and still as though they had been painted there. He never returned to the forest after that day. Time passed, and the age of war ended, yet the curse did not fade. Travelers disappeared, their absence woven into folklore. The forest became not only a place of fear, but of memory, a place where Japan's oldest sins and secrets still lingered. Centuries later, the forest attracted new attention, not from warriors or monks, but from scholars and archaeologists. In the 20th century, an excavation team was granted access to explore the edge of the forest, hoping to uncover traces of the feudal battles said to have been fought nearby. At first, they unearthed fragments of pottery, rusted arrowheads, remnants of armor. Nothing unusual, nothing more than relics of war. But then their shovels struck bone. The first skeleton lay only a few feet beneath the surface, its skull tilted upward, its jaw stretched wide as though frozen in a silent scream. More followed. Dozens of skeletons clustered together in shallow graves. Yet what unsettled the archaeologists most was not their number, but their posture. They were buried upright. Each body stood as though planted into the ground, their spines rigid, their arms reaching skyward. Fingers curled, clawing the earth above. The bones were twisted, distorted, their positions impossible to explain as the result of natural decay. Some theorized they had been executed and buried hastily. But the soil revealed no sign of tools, no sign of mass graves dug in haste. Instead, it appeared as though the earth itself had swallowed them where they stood. The deeper the excavation dug, the more skeletons appeared, all in the same position, upright, reaching, begging for something beyond the soil. The whispers among the excavation crew grew darker. Some believed these were the sinners of the monks' rituals, their shadows severed and their bodies abandoned. Others thought they were soldiers, cursed in battle, dragged into the ground by forces unseen. One archaeologist, desperate for answers, turned to the old scrolls kept in a nearby temple. There, he found passages describing the rituals of severing. They spoke of shadows that refused to depart peacefully, of sinners who clawed at the earth as their last shred of humanity was torn from them. The scrolls described bodies writhing in circles of ash, arms reaching upward as their shadows slipped away. The connection was undeniable. The skeletons were not merely dead. They were condemned. For weeks, the excavation continued. Strange incidents plagued the camp. Tools went missing, lanterns flickered without wind, and some workers swore they saw shadows bending differently beneath the floodlights. One night, a young assistant fled into the trees, screaming that his shadow was moving on its own. He was never seen again. At last, the excavation was halted. The site was sealed, the findings locked away in university archives. Official reports mentioned skeletons, yes, but stripped of detail, stripped of the terror that gripped those who uncovered them. Yet those who were there will never forget the sight of arms reaching skyward, frozen in eternal desperation. And the most haunting thought of all is this: if the monks' rituals severed shadows, if the forest itself bound those fragments into its soil, then the skeletons were not merely the dead. They were the evidence of a curse still alive. For even now, when the wind shifts and the canopy whispers, some claim to hear the faint scrape of bone against soil, as though those buried upright are still reaching, still clawing, still begging to be remembered. The forest does not forgive. It does not forget. Its curse, once born, does not die. The question remains, what happens when something buried for centuries finally decides to rise? There are places where the mind betrays itself, where exhaustion, fear, and isolation twist the senses. But what happens when the betrayal does not come from the mind, nor the body, but from the very darkness that follows us? The forest of whispers has long been feared for its vanishings, its curses, its endless silence. Yet among all the stories that linger in its shadow, none are as unsettling as those told by the few who have survived. Their words share a theme too strange to dismiss, too consistent to ignore. In the forest, shadows are not to be trusted. The earliest surviving account belongs to a woodcutter from centuries past, whose testimony was recorded in temple archives. He claimed that one evening, as the sun fell low and the trees lengthened their silhouettes across the soil, he noticed something wrong. His shadow was not aligned with his movements. He lifted his arm, and the shape beneath him delayed. He bent to gather his tools, and the shadow remained upright. Terrified, he fled, sprinting through the underbrush. But when he looked down, the earth beneath his feet bore no companion. His body ran, but his shadow did not follow. When he returned to the village, pale and trembling, the monks dismissed his fear as fatigue. Yet within days, he vanished. His belongings were found in his hut, his sandals by the door, but his bed unslept in. On the wall, lit by the lantern of neighbors searching for him, was his shadow, pressed flat against the wood, its arms outstretched as if it had been running still. The tale endured through generations, recited as warning, as ghost story, as proof. But it was not the last. In the modern era, hikers have spoken of similar experiences. One young woman, who staggered out of the forest after 3 nights lost, told investigators that she had tried to escape when she realized her shadow was behaving strangely. She described stopping to rest, only to watch her silhouette continue walking. It moved ahead of her, unhurried, as though unconcerned with her exhaustion. She called out in panic, but the shadow did not stop. It simply walked deeper into the trees until it vanished altogether. She collapsed soon after, weeping in confusion. Rescuers found her near the forest's edge, dehydrated and trembling. She would not re-enter the woods, not even to retrieve her dropped belongings. Her final words to investigators still echo, If your shadow leaves you, you're already dead. It's just waiting for you to catch up. Not all survivors escape so quickly. Some spend days fighting their own disbelief, clinging to reason even as their eyes betray them. A mountaineer from Kyoto, whose story circulated among climbing communities, claimed he had camped overnight in the forest with two companions. On the second evening, they noticed something peculiar when sitting around their fire. Their shadows stretched wrong against the trees. Not longer or shorter than expected, but wrong, as though bent in the middle, contorted into shapes their bodies could never hold. At first, they laughed it off, blaming the angle of the flames. But as the night deepened, the mountaineer swore he saw one of his companion's shadows rise before the man himself did. The figure of darkness stood before the fire, hands trembling, head bowed, while its owner still sat cross-legged on the ground. When he blinked, both were aligned again. But he never forgot that single, impossible glimpse. Days later, his companions were gone, their camp intact, their belongings undisturbed, yet no trace of them remained. He alone stumbled out of the forest, repeating the same thought. The shadows went first, then the bodies followed. Stories like his multiply, and with them, fear. But in a world that trusts evidence more than whispers, many dismiss these accounts as delusion. Survivors, they argue, are unreliable. Exhaustion, dehydration, and fear can warp perception. And so came the scientists. Over the past 50 years, numerous expeditions have attempted to bring technology into the forest depths. They sought not spirits or curses, but measurable phenomena: light distortions, electromagnetic shifts, psychological breakdowns. They carried cameras, light meters, heat sensors, and even experimental equipment designed to track subtle fluctuations in radiation. Each expedition entered confident. Each returned broken. The failures began with the instruments themselves. Light meters flickered wildly, recording sudden surges and collapses in brightness, even when the human eye saw no change. Heat sensors detected bodies where none existed, sudden bursts of warmth in empty clearings. Compasses spun endlessly, pointing nowhere, as though the forest refused to grant direction. Worse still were the cameras. Footage recorded inside the forest often revealed distortions not seen by the researchers. In one case, a camera fixed upon a seated investigator showed him clearly, but his shadow was missing. He shifted, turned, waved his arm, yet the ground beneath him remained empty of shape. To the human eye, the shadow was visible. To the camera, it was gone. Another expedition attempted night vision imaging. At first, the footage appeared normal, but when slowed and analyzed, shapes emerged. Blurred figures drifting across the screen, not matching the movements of the team. They passed between the investigators and their equipment, yet no one reacted at the time. The figures were seen only afterward, captured by a lens the human mind could not replicate. The teams returned shaken, their instruments unreliable, their findings inconclusive. Yet they all agreed on one detail. The forest interfered not with the body, but with its reflection. Something in the balance between light and dark was broken there. One investigator, a physicist by trade, proposed a chilling hypothesis. He argued that shadows are not illusions at all, but records, living imprints of a body in space and time. If such records could be manipulated, severed, or stolen, then a person might still breathe, but no longer belong. Their tether to existence would fray, leaving them vulnerable to erasure. It was theory, nothing more, dismissed by his colleagues. But those who had seen the footage, who had watched shadows behave with a will of their own, found it disturbingly plausible. Then came a photograph. It was taken not by scientists, but by a team of investigators hired to document missing hikers. They carried traditional cameras, cautious not to rely solely on digital equipment. For days, they photographed campsites, footprints, landscapes. Nothing unusual appeared, until one evening, they posed for a group photograph at the edge of a clearing. The image was developed. 6 people stood together, weary but smiling faintly. Behind them, the trees loomed, The ground beneath their boots was clear. And that was the horror. There were no shadows. Not one. The photograph showed 6 living figures, yet the earth beneath them was empty, as though light had passed through their bodies without resistance. Their silhouettes, their natural companions, were gone. The investigators swore that when the picture was taken, their shadows were present. They had seen them stretch across the soil, but the image betrayed them. One member of the team kept the photograph locked away, refusing to look at it again. Another destroyed his copy, claiming it was cursed. Yet the story leaked, told in hushed tones among colleagues. And with it spread a terrible realization. The forest does not simply twist shadows. It can erase them. And when the shadow disappears, how long before the body follows? The question lingers, unsettling, unanswered. The investigators in the photograph still live, at least for now. But if the forest has already taken their shadows, then perhaps their end has already begun. Perhaps their vanishings are not a matter of if, but when. And if a shadow can vanish from a photograph while the body remains, what else can be erased before its time? The canopy whispers still, carrying stories of those who ran without shadows, of scientists whose cameras revealed more than their eyes, of investigators smiling in a picture that proved they no longer belong. And the forest waits, patient, for the moment when every body catches up to the absence that has already claimed them. Some forests test the strength of a traveler. They challenge with steep cliffs, thick roots, or the dangers of beasts that call them home. But this forest is different. Its danger is not the climb, nor the predator. Its danger is the ground itself. For here, the very shape of the earth cannot be trusted. The forest shifts. What begins as a path does not end as one. Trails bend into themselves, rivers vanish and reappear where no water should be, and maps lose meaning within a single step. Some say the land rearranges its bones when no one is looking. Others whisper that it does so even while the eyes are open, that the mind simply cannot comprehend what has changed. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. Those who enter do not walk the land as it is, but as the forest chooses to reveal it. The first signs are subtle. A traveler steps onto a trail, notices a crooked tree to their right, a mossy stone to their left. Hours later, they return to the same crooked tree, the same mossy stone, though they are certain they walked in a straight line. Perhaps they tell themselves they looped by mistake. Perhaps they lost focus, but the loops return. Every direction circles back. The crooked tree greets them again and again, its roots coiled like a mocking smile. Panic grows. The forest feeds on it. Survivors who stumbled out speak of rivers that vanish midstream. One man swore he filled his bottle at a bubbling brook, yet when he raised it to drink, the water within had turned to soil, as though the river had never been water at all. Another spoke of following a river's edge for hours, only to find it end abruptly in a bed of cracked stones, the water gone as though swallowed by the earth. He collapsed from thirst before stumbling into the arms of rescuers. His eyes never recovered their clarity. Compasses spin wildly, needles trembling as though caught in invisible storms. Devices meant to map the terrain flicker with nonsense, paths shifting across their screens. Even the sun cannot be trusted, its position in the sky repeating itself, noon arriving twice, shadows bending against their owners before snapping back as if time itself had been bent out of order. It is said the forest rearranges itself, not only to confuse, but to trap. Travelers walk until their legs give way, until hope crumbles beneath exhaustion. They cry out, but their voices carry strangely, returning to them from directions they did not call. Some hear their own words spoken back with a delay, as if the forest repeats them for its own amusement. The toll is not only physical. The mind unravels. Survivors speak of hallucinations, though the word feels insufficient for what they describe. They see companions walking ahead, only to vanish when touched. They hear footsteps behind them, though no one follows. One woman swore she saw herself, standing among the trees, her double staring silently with eyes that glowed faintly in the dusk. She ran, but wherever she turned, the double stood waiting until the woman collapsed in terror. Rescuers found her days later, unable to speak, her hair turned stark white. Not all survived the unraveling. The forest has claimed many through despair alone. Suicide stain its history, bodies found hanging from its branches or lying still beside streams that no longer flow. Notes left behind speak of hopeless repetition, of paths that lead nowhere, of days blending into endless circles. One hiker wrote, "I have walked the same trail 3 times, or perhaps 30. I do not know anymore. If I stay, I will lose myself. If I go, I return to the same beginning. The forest does not want me to leave." His body was found days later, rope tied to a low branch, his shadow strangely absent in the light of the investigators' lamps. Yet amid the despair, there are those who speak not of hallucination, but of design. They believe the forest is alive, and that its rearranging is not random, but deliberate. It closes its grip on the lost, moving its bones like a serpent coiling around prey. Each loop is not chance, but a tightening, each vanishing river not illusion, but hunger. A ranger once said, "The forest decides how many steps you take, not you." He never returned after his final patrol. Science has tried to defy the forest. Teams have entered with advanced equipment, GPS trackers, drones meant to map the terrain from above. They believe technology could chart what the human mind could not. But the forest resists even machines. GPS trackers show circles where straight lines were walked. Batteries drain unnaturally fast, as though the air itself consumes their power. Drones rise into the canopy only to lose signal, their footage corrupted, their paths looping as if pulled back by unseen strings. Yet one drone returned. It was launched by a university team determined to prove the forest geometry was not alive but misunderstood. The device flew high, its camera steady, sending live footage back to the monitors in the team's base camp. At first, the images were clear. Trees stretched endlessly, rivers glistened, shadows moved with the wind. Nothing unusual. Then the feed shifted. On the screen, a figure appeared. A hiker walking steadily along a trail, head bowed, arms swinging faintly at their sides. The clarity of the image left no doubt. Someone was there, alive, deep within the forest. The team erupted in relief, believing they had found one of the missing. They scrambled to match the drone's coordinates, eager to send rescuers. But then came the silence. The base camp radios buzzed with confirmation. No one was in that area. No rescuers, no hikers, no camps. The coordinates pointed to an untouched part of the forest, unreachable and empty. Still, the drone's footage continued. The figure walked calmly, never glancing up, never altering their pace. Yet something was wrong. Their shadow moved differently, its steps lagging behind, its arms twitching at angles no human body could mimic. The drone spun slightly, capturing a wider view. There was no one else. No other figure cast light or shade. Only this lone hiker, walking a path that should not exist. Then, as if sensing the gaze, the figure stopped. Slowly, their head tilted upward toward the drone. Their face was blurred, indistinct, yet the tilt of their neck carried weight. Their eyes, though featureless, locked on the lens. The drone feed shattered into static. When recovered, the drone showed no sign of damage. Its memory card was intact, yet the footage ended the moment the figure looked up. No final frame, no corrupted image, only blackness where the forest had been. The team sat in silence, haunted by what they had witnessed. The official report dismissed the footage as technical error, but those who were present knew otherwise. They had not seen error. They had seen something walking where no one should have been. And the question clawed at them with every passing night. Was it a hiker trapped in endless repetition, condemned to walk forever? Or was it something else entirely? Something the forest had created, shaped from memory, shadow, and silence? The forest does not reveal its truths willingly. It shifts, it loops, it swallows, it toys. And when it allows something to be seen, one must wonder whether it is showing what is or what it wants us to believe. Every place with a curse has its keeper. Some are spirits bound by duty, others demons bound by hunger. And in this forest, there is one figure whispered of more than any other. Neither man nor beast, neither god nor ghost. A figure cloaked in endless shadow, standing silent among the trees. The guardian of the lost. Legends say it is older than memory. Older than the monks who performed their rituals. Older than the wars fought at the forest's edge. Older even than the people who first carved their villages from the soil of Japan. Some call it a servant of the forest. Others call its master. But all agree on one thing. It is not seen by chance. The guardian appears only to those who are chosen. The stories are fragmented, scattered across centuries of folklore and fear. One tale tells of a hunter who strayed too far into the trees. He saw a figure standing in the distance, taller than any man, yet with no features but shadow. It watched him silently. He turned to flee, but every path led him back to the same place where the figure waited. At last, he fell to his knees, begging for release. The figure raised one arm, and the hunter swore the shadows around him shifted, parting like water. He stumbled free of the forest that day, but when he returned to his village, the others stepped back in horror. He cast no shadow at all. Another tale comes from a traveling priest who entered the forest centuries ago to confront the curse with prayer. He was never seen again, but his writings, later found in a shrine, described his final night. He wrote of a silence so deep he could hear the blood in his veins, and of a figure standing beyond his fire. He described its shape as human, yet wrong. Its limbs were too long, its shoulders too narrow, its presence heavy enough to bend the air. He prayed until dawn, but the figure never moved. When the sun rose, it was gone. His diary ended there. The most unsettling part of the legend is not that the guardian appears, but that it judges. Folklore insists it decides who may leave the forest and who must stay. Those it favors are guided to safety, often waking at the forest's edge with no memory of how they arrived. Those it condemns are never seen again. Some say the guardian consumes them. Others claim it delivers them to the shadows, severing their last tie to existence. But the oldest version of the myth ties the guardian to betrayal to the gods themselves. In ancient Shinto lore, it is said that the kami, the divine spirits of nature, once entrusted this land to a protector. A being neither mortal nor divine, created to maintain balance. It was tasked with guiding the souls of the lost to rest, ensuring no shadow lingered too long. But something went wrong. The kami withdrew their blessing. Some say the guardian betrayed them, hungering not for balance, but for power. Others whisper that it was the kami themselves who betrayed the guardian, binding it to the forest for eternity, forcing it to carry out its duty without end. Whichever story is true, the outcome is the same. The guardian remains, cloaked in shadows, bound to the shifting woods. It does not sleep. It does not age. And when it appears, it decides. Modern accounts are rare but chilling. Hikers who claim to have seen it describe a figure that blends with the forest, its edges shifting like smoke, its form never fully defined. Some insist it has no face, only a void where features should be. Others say it wears many faces, shifting between them as though trying on masks. The only consistency is the feeling it brings, the overwhelming certainty that they're being judged. One survivor, a middle-aged man who entered the forest searching for his missing son, spoke of an encounter that broke him. He said he wandered for days, calling his child's name, when he noticed something watching him. At first, he thought it was only a shadow among the trees. But when he moved, the shadow did not. It grew taller, darker, until it stood as a figure before him. He described falling to his knees, sobbing, begging to see his son again. The figure did not move, but he felt something press against his mind, a weight so heavy he could not breathe. Then, the shadows around him parted, revealing a path he had not seen before. He followed it blindly and stumbled out of the forest hours later. But his son was never found. The man never entered the woods again. He told others that the guardian had judged him unworthy, sparing his life but denying him what he sought. It decides, he whispered. Not us. It decides. For years, such stories remained folklore, dismissed by officials as superstition. But then came the Rangers. Tasked with protecting the borders, Rangers patrol the forest more often than any other group. They know its trails, its dangers, its silence. And though many refuse to speak of it publicly, the legend of the Guardian haunts them. One ranger, a veteran of 20 years, finally broke his silence in an anonymous account. He wrote that during a routine patrol, he felt the weight of eyes upon him. He turned and saw a figure standing far down the path. At first, he thought it was a man, but the figure did not move, did not breathe, did not waver. It was cloaked in shadow, darker than the night itself, its shape shifting subtly, as though made of smoke. He raised his radio to call for backup. At that moment, the figure tilted its head. The motion was slow, deliberate, filled with unnatural intent. The ranger froze, paralyzed by fear. When he finally spoke into the radio, his voice was barely a whisper. His last words before the transmission cut out were, "It's watching me." Search teams combed the forest for days. They found his radio lying in the dirt, its casing cracked. They found his patrol notes scattered among the leaves. But they never found him. Not his body, not his clothes, not even his footprints. Only silence, heavy and endless. The legend of the Guardian grew darker that day. It was no longer a story told only by villagers or monks. It had claimed one of their own. A man trained, experienced, armed with knowledge and courage. And yet when the Guardian decided, none of that mattered. The forest keeps its secrets, but it does not keep them quietly. The whispers continue, carrying stories of judgment, betrayal, and shadows that bend into the shape of a figure older than time. Some say the Guardian is merciful, guiding the lost to safety. Others insist it is cruel, feeding on despair, trapping souls within the shifting woods. But all agree on one thing. When the Guardian appears, there is no choice, only its decision. And so the question lingers, heavy as the silence of the forest itself. If you stood in that cursed place, if you saw the figure cloaked in shadow watching you from the trees, what would it decide? Would it grant you passage? Or would it keep you forever? Another whisper in the canopy, another shadow in the soil? Every forest keeps secrets, but not all secrets are meant to be uncovered. Some are buried because time forgets them, others because men choose to forget. But there are also secrets that bury themselves, twisting deeper into the soil, hiding from every eye until the land itself decides to reveal them. In this cursed forest, there are whispers not only of vanishings, not only of shadows, not only of guardians cloaked in endless dark. There are whispers of knowledge forbidden. It began when researchers ventured farther into the heart of the forest than any before them. They were not hikers chasing wonder, not villagers bound by superstition, not rangers following duty. They were men and women of science, determined to replace myth with fact. They believed the forest could be explained, its vanishings a matter of disorientation, its shadows tricks of light, its whispers only wind. They entered with instruments, notebooks, and reason as their armor. But the forest does not bend to reason. For days they cataloged the ordinary, rare plants, unusual moss, trees older than memory itself. Yet their careful exploration led them to something they did not expect. Carvings. The marks were deep in the bark of towering cedars, spirals and lines etched in precise formation. At first they thought them random, the idle scratches of villagers or hunters. But the deeper they searched, the more patterns emerged. Spirals repeating across multiple trees, curling inward as though drawing the eye into an endless loop. Symbols cut with hands that knew intention, not accident. Some resembled the script of old sutras, though distorted, bent, made alien by centuries of repetition. And then there were the warnings, carved in kanji faded by time. They found phrases scattered through the woods. Do not follow your shadow. The trees remember. Light betrays, each warning etched not once, but many times, as though those who wrote them hoped desperately that someone, anyone, might heed their cry. The researchers documented everything. Photographs, rubbings, transcriptions. Yet the further they traced the carvings, the more unsettled they became. For the spirals always led deeper. It was as if the forest itself had laid a trail, a lure, winding them towards something hidden. After 3 days, they found it. A shrine. It stood in a clearing where the canopy broke just enough for light to fall. Moss crawled over its stones, vines wrapped around its base, but its presence was undeniable. Unlike the shrines of villages, bright with color and offering, this one was blackened by fire. Its surface bore scars of burning, its offerings reduced to ash that lingered even centuries later. At its foot lay stones carved with names. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, though time had worn many into illegibility. Each stone bore a single name etched by careful hand, lined together in grim order. Some had been chipped away violently, as though someone had tried to erase them. Others bore strange stains, darker than rust, seeping into the stone as though the names themselves had bled. The team stood in silence. The air was heavy with something beyond history, something sacred and broken. They recorded what they could, but even the most skeptical among them felt unease settle in their bones. That night they debated. What was the shrine? Why had the villagers carved names instead of prayers? Why burn offerings only to abandon them? The oldest among the researchers, a historian versed in Shinto and Buddhist traditions, was the first to voice the theory none wished to believe. He reminded them of the old stories, the monks who severed shadows, the sinners condemned to wander without their dark half. He told them that in certain rituals across Japan, names are more than identifiers. A name can bind a soul. To write it is to claim it. To carve it is to dedicate it. He proposed that the villagers, fearful of the forest's hunger, offered not their bodies, but their shadows. They carved their names in stone, leaving them as sacrifice. They burned offerings to seal the ritual, and in exchange, the forest spared them. The others dismissed him at first, unwilling to entertain such horror. But as they read the warnings carved in the trees, the words gained weight. Do not follow your shadow. The trees remember. What if these were not warnings for travelers, but warnings from those who had bargained with the forest? What if the price of survival was the surrender of one's own dark half? The historian pressed further. He argued that the shrine was not abandoned. It was sealed. The villagers had ended the practice, burning the shrine to close the pact. But the forest did not forget. The names carved into stone remained, bound to the soil, bound to the shadows that never left. The researchers listened, torn between disbelief and the chill that crept up their spines. Some insisted they had found nothing more than an old shrine, distorted by centuries of rumor. But others could not shake the weight of the names, the spirals, the endless warnings. Days passed. The deeper they studied the shrine, the more the atmosphere pressed against them. Instruments failed, batteries drained. Their nights grew restless, dreams filled with whispers calling their names, though none could remember the words upon waking. And then one of them broke. He was a young man, eager, skeptical, but worn down by exhaustion. For hours he studied the stones, tracing the grooves of names long forgotten. His companions urged him to rest, but he refused. He muttered that the villagers had lived, that they had survived by offering their shadows, that perhaps they had found a way to appease the forest. When the others returned at dusk, they found him at the shrine, knife in hand. He had carved his name into the stone. Fresh, deep, unmistakable. They shouted in panic, rushing toward him. But before they could reach his side, he vanished. Not into the trees, not into the air, but as though the ground itself inhaled him. One moment he stood, his knife clattering from his hand. The next, there was nothing. Only his name, newly carved into stone, gleaming wet in the fading light. The team froze in terror. They searched the clearing, their cries echoing, their hands clawing at the soil. But there was no trace. Not his body, not his belongings, not even his shadow. Only his voice lingered, faint and fleeting, carried in the wind. A single word, half-formed, as though he were still calling from somewhere unseen. The shrine stood silent, the burned offerings at its base whispering of centuries past. The names carved in a stone glowed faintly in the dark, and now among them lay one more. His companions fled, stumbling through the forest until they found the edge of the trees. They never spoke of what they saw, save in fragments whispered to those who would listen. But the shrine remains, hidden deep within the shifting woods, waiting for another who dares to read the names, who dares to carve their own. And so the forbidden knowledge endures. The forest remembers every offering, every shadow surrendered, every name carved into its stones. It waits for the next hand to trace the spirals, the next voice to ignore the warnings, the next soul desperate enough to believe survival lies in sacrifice. But the forest is not merciful. It does not forgive. It only takes. And when it does, it takes without return. The human mind is built upon patterns. We trust the rhythm of days, the certainty of cause and effect, the comfort that our senses reflect truth. But in the cursed forest, those patterns unravel. What begins as doubt becomes terror, and what begins as terror becomes madness. The forest does not need claws or fangs to devour its prey. It only needs to undo reason. At first, the unraveling is subtle. Explorers walk for hours before noticing that their sense of time has fractured. Minutes stretch into eternities. An hour feels like a day, then vanishes in a blink. Watches tick in unnatural rhythm. Some slow, others race. The human heartbeat, once steady, feels out of sync with the world around it. Exhaustion arrives too soon, hunger too late, as if the body itself is confused by the place it inhabits. But the forest does not stop there. It reaches deeper. Survivors speak of hearing voices in the canopy. Not whispers from strangers, not chants from the lost, but something far crueler. They hear their own names. At first, it is faint, a murmur in the wind, a syllable caught between branches. But soon the voice grows clearer, unmistakable. It is their voice, their tone, their breath. They hear themselves calling from somewhere beyond sight. Come here, this way, don't stop. Some follow, desperate for the illusion of companionship. They wander until the voice leads them deeper and deeper still, until they vanish into silence. Others resist, covering their ears, screaming to drown the sound. But the voice does not need ears to be heard. It blooms inside their skull, rattling their thoughts, pulling at their will. One man, a geologist who entered the forest with instruments to study its soil, wrote his experiences in a notebook that rescuers later recovered. His notes began calm, clinical, listing mineral samples and terrain features. But the handwriting grew shaky as the days passed. He wrote that he heard his name spoken constantly, always in his own voice. At first, it came from behind him, then beside him. At last, it came from within him. He wrote, "I am not alone. I am too. I hear myself even when I am silent." The notebook ended there. His body was never found. The forest does not only twist sound, it twists light. Shadows stretch unnaturally long, bending around trees in ways geometry cannot explain. A torch held to the ground casts a shadow that loops, curling across roots and vanishing into directions where the body does not stand. Campfires project silhouettes that writhe as though alive, moving when the campers are still. One survivor described his shadow bending upward, stretching tall against the trunk of a cedar, its head turning slowly to look back at him. He did not sleep that night. Panic grows with every distortion. Sleep becomes impossible, rest fleeting. The forest presses its weight upon the mind, and those who cannot bear it fracture. Hallucinations bloom like poison flowers. Travelers see faces among the trees, faces of the dead, of family, of strangers. They hear footsteps following them in perfect rhythm with their own. Some claim they see themselves walking ahead, a double that mimics every gesture until it turns, revealing eyes dark as void. It is no wonder suicides are common here. Some believe those who take their own lives are trying to escape the torment before their sanity is consumed. Others whisper that the forest drives them deliberately, pushing until despair becomes their only release. Notes left behind tell of endless repetition, voices that never cease, shadows that no longer obey. One such note, scrawled on the back of a map, read simply, "I cannot tell where I end and the forest begins." And yet, amid the despair, there are survivors. A handful of broken souls have stumbled out, pale and hollow-eyed, clutching scraps of their reason like torn fabric. Their testimonies are chilling in their sameness. One woman swore she walked in circles for days, always returning to the same dead tree, its bark marked by a lightning strike. She carved a line into it each time she passed. By the time rescuers found her, the tree bore dozens of cuts. She could not explain how many days had passed. A man described watching his own hands move without command, as though strings guided his limbs. He screamed until his voice broke, clawing at his arms, as if to sever the invisible control. When he was found, his nails were torn, his eyes wide with unblinking terror. Another survivor was discovered wandering near the forest's edge, barefoot, his clothes in tatters. When questioned, he could not recall his name. He repeated only one phrase, "I saw myself die." For each who emerges, countless do not. And those who do return are never whole. They are shadows of themselves, fragments of reason stitched together poorly. Families welcome them with relief, but soon realize they have not brought back the person they lost. They have brought back something changed. The forest leaves its mark. And then came the most chilling case of all. A group of young men entered the forest on a dare, mocking the legends, carrying cheap cameras to document their courage. They laughed as they recorded carvings in the trees, mimicked the warnings, pretended to speak to spirits. But the laughter faded on the second day. Their footage, later recovered, shows them growing uneasy, their jokes falling silent. One recorded his own shadow, stretching unnaturally, curling around the trees. Another filmed what he swore was his friend walking ahead, though the friend was standing beside him. The footage ends abruptly, the camera dropped in the soil. The young men never returned. Weeks later, a survivor emerged at dawn, collapsing on the road near the forest's entrance. He was rushed to a hospital, dehydrated and incoherent. For days, he lay in silence, staring at the wall. When at last he spoke, his words were chilling. He claimed he had wandered for what felt like weeks, hearing his own voice call him, seeing his own figure lead him deeper. He said he followed once, only once, and what he saw broke him. "I saw myself standing," he whispered, "but my shadow was gone. It was walking without me. It looked back at me with my face, and then it left." Doctors dismissed his account as delirium, but his condition grew stranger. Nurses noticed something unsettling. When light fell upon him, no shadow followed. The survivor lived. He breathed, he walked, he spoke. But when the sun struck him, when lamps glowed in his room, the ground beneath him was empty. No silhouette, no outline, no shadow at all. The doctors called it impossible, a trick of light, a failure of perception. But photographs confirmed it. His body cast nothing. Mirrors reflected him, but the wall behind him bore no shape. He was a man without darkness. And the most terrifying question of all remained unanswered. If the forest had taken his shadow, had it also taken part of him? Was he truly alive, or merely waiting, incomplete, for the rest of him to vanish? The survivor does not speak now. He sits in silence, watching the floor where his shadow should be. Some say he is only waiting, that the forest is not finished with him. And if the forest can claim a shadow while leaving the body behind, what else might it strip away, piece by piece, until nothing remains? The collapse of reason is not just madness. It is surrender. It is the forest undoing the very foundation of what it means to exist. And the whispers continue, carrying the voices of those who broke, of those who wandered too deep, of those who left their shadows behind. Every legend has an origin. Every curse is born from a wound, and every haunting begins with a choice. For centuries, the forest has been known as a place of vanishings, of whispers, of shadows that move against the light. But the deeper truth does not lie in chance. It lies in ritual. The discovery came not from modern explorers, but from the brittle pages of ancient texts locked away in temple archives. Scrolls so fragile they crumbled at the touch, their ink faded by centuries, yet still legible enough to reveal the terrible practices once carried out beneath the canopy. The texts describe what the monks called kage-kiru, the severing of shadows. It was a ritual not of blessing, but of punishment, a belief that the sins of a man could be cut away if his shadow was removed, leaving his body freed from corruption. But the price of freedom was horror, for the shadow did not vanish with the ceremony. It lingered, hungry, restless, cursed to wander forever without its host. The scrolls describe the procedure in agonizing detail. The sinner was brought into the forest, blindfolded, and made to kneel within a circle of ash. Candles were lit, their flames flickering with unnatural shapes, bending not with the wind, but with the chants of the monks. The condemned was forced to confess their sins aloud, their words echoing into the branches, carried upward into the canopy where the forest would remember them. Then the monks would raise blades, not to the flesh, but to the shadow. With gestures precise and ancient, they struck at the silhouette cast upon the earth. And though steel should not wound darkness, the texts insist that the shadow writhed, tore, and split away from the body. The sinner would scream, not from wounds of flesh, but from the tearing of something deeper. Their body collapsed, weakened, stripped of its twin, and the shadow, alive now, severed and abandoned, would crawl upon the ground like smoke given form. The monks left them both there, the body to wander until death, the shadow to linger, nameless, hungry, feeding on whatever warmth it could find. The ritual was meant as mercy twisted into cruelty, to free the spirit from sin, yet condemn the other half to eternal unrest. But the forest does not forget, and those shadows, abandoned centuries ago, still remain. The texts go further, warning of the consequences. They describe shadows that stalked the monks themselves, following them into their temples, clinging to their walls, whispering in the voices of the condemned. Some monks went mad, clawing at their own bodies in a desperate attempt to find where their shadows hid. Others vanished, leaving only their silhouettes pressed against the stones where they once prayed. Over time, the ritual was abandoned. The monks burned their shrine, sealed their scrolls, and swore never to speak of kage-kiru again. But the damage had been done. The forest had been filled with shadows severed from their hosts, fragments of lives torn apart. And those fragments, unbound and ravenous, began to feed. Here lies the connection to the present. The modern vanishings, hikers who leave only footprints, soldiers who disappear mid-meal, researchers who dissolve before their companions' eyes, are not random. They are claimed. Each missing person is believed, in the oldest whispers, to have been taken by the shadows left behind. When a shadow is cut from its body, it hungers eternally. It cannot return to its host, so it seeks another. It clings, it follows, it consumes. To step into the forest is to step among these fragments, to walk surrounded by thousands of starving silhouettes. They press close, waiting for weakness, for exhaustion, for fear. And when the moment comes, they strike, not with teeth, but with the theft of one's own reflection. This explains why so many vanish mid-step, why camps remain intact, why voices echo in the canopy. When a shadow is taken, the body follows, helpless as a puppet whose strings have been cut. One survivor, an elderly villager who once entered the forest as a child, told a story that has been passed down in whispers. He claimed that as a boy he wandered too far, chasing a deer. As the sun fell, he saw his shadow move differently from his body. Terrified, he fled, but he felt another shape at his heels. A second shadow, stretching beside his own, reaching to merge with him. He stumbled out of the forest by luck, but he swore he left something behind. His nights have never been free of whispers since. Another survivor, a hiker rescued near the edge, muttered endlessly of being followed. Not by footsteps, not by breath, but by darkness itself. He described the sensation of something sliding along the ground behind him, keeping pace though it made no sound. "It wasn't my shadow," he said before collapsing. "It was theirs. The evidence is chilling. Photographs where shadows vanish. Cameras that capture figures unseen. Footprints that end mid-stride. And now, the scrolls confirming what villagers have long feared, that the forest is a graveyard not of bodies, but of shadows." Yet the most terrifying revelation came not from parchment, but from a recording. A group of modern researchers, determined to prove or disprove the legends, set cameras throughout the forest. Most captured only silence, empty paths, the slow shifting of branches. But one camera recorded something else. The footage begins simple, a trail winding through the trees, mist curling along the ground. The lens is steady, the image clear. Then movement. A figure emerges. At first it appears human, walking upright, its steps deliberate. But the longer the camera lingers, the more wrong it becomes. The body is not flesh. It is shifting darkness, a silhouette without substance, its edges flickering like smoke in wind. Its limbs bend too fluidly, stretching and snapping back as though the figure is held together by nothing but hunger. The figure pauses. Its head tilts, though there are no features upon it. And then it steps closer, closer still, until the screen is filled with writhing black. The footage ends in static. Those who saw it whispered the same thought. It was not a ghost. It was not a hallucination. It was a shadow, severed long ago, yet walking upright, thing given form. And if one such figure walks, how many more drift unseen among the trees? How many of the lost, torn from their bodies centuries past, still linger, feeding, waiting? The ritual of severing may have ended, but its legacy has not. The forest is filled with their remnants, fragments of darkness hungry for warmth, for breath, for flesh. Each vanishing is not a mystery, but a claiming. Another soul dragged into the endless hunger of shadows. And the most haunting truth of all, the ritual was meant to free, but instead it cursed the land forever. The forest does not forgive. The shadows do not die. They only wait, shifting in the silence, until the next step falls upon the soil. And when that step comes, they rise. There is no despair sharper than the despair of false freedom. To believe the nightmare is behind you, to feel the relief of escape rise in your chest, only to discover you have never left it at all. In the cursed forest, this is not just possibility. It is inevitability. Many who enter do not return. But of those who do, some carry stories of escape that unravel into horrors far worse than death. For the forest does not only consume, it deceives. The accounts begin the same way. A traveler, lost for days, stumbles upon a path that feels different. The trees thin, the air grows lighter, the sound of civilization echoes faintly through the silence. Their heart leaps with hope. They hurry forward, believing they have finally reached the edge. And then, suddenly, they are standing outside the forest. They cry, they collapse, they weep with joy. Some even laugh, swearing they will never enter again. But the joy is short-lived. For when they look more closely, when they trace their steps, they realize the truth. They have emerged not into freedom, but back to the very entrance where they began. It is as though the forest has folded upon itself, returning them not to safety, but to the threshold of their own doom. They are free, yes, but free only to repeat the nightmare again. One hiker, a young man from Tokyo, described walking for 3 full days before the trees finally opened. He believed he had escaped, but when he saw the signpost at the entrance, his blood froze. It was the same post he had touched when he first entered. The same cracked paint, the same initials carved into the wood. He collapsed to his knees, realizing he had not left the forest at all. He had walked in circles so perfect they returned him to the beginning. And yet, his account grows darker. He insisted the path had not felt like a circle. He had crossed rivers, scaled ridges, passed landmarks he had never seen before. His steps were real, his exhaustion undeniable. But the forest had tricked his sense of distance, bending space itself until freedom became only repetition. Maps are no salvation. Another survivor, a mountaineer, carried detailed charts and a compass. He marked every step, every direction, calculating his progress with precision. For days he walked, mapping rivers and trails, believing he had conquered the labyrinth. At last, he reached a clearing he did not recognize, believing himself close to safety. But when he unfolded his map, his marks betrayed him. Every line converged upon the same point. Every path led back to the same trail. His map, filled with careful notes, showed only a circle. He burned it that night, his screams echoing into the canopy. Even technology falters. GPS devices flicker with nonsense, showing hikers walking miles only to return to their own starting point. One rescue team swore they followed a straight line north. Yet when their tracker was reviewed, it revealed a spiral, coiling tighter and tighter until they had walked into their own footprints. The forest does not simply twist paths. It twists reality. Psychological horror blooms in such moments. To escape, only to realize the escape was false, breaks the human spirit in ways the body cannot endure. Survivors collapse into despair, refusing to walk again, knowing that no matter how far their feet carry them, they will return to the beginning. Some end their own lives at the entrance, unable to bear the thought of stepping back inside. But others walk again, believing the next attempt will succeed. These are the ones the forest plays with most cruelly. One account tells of a man who entered with a group of friends. They vanished within days, leaving him alone. For a week he walked, surviving on scraps of food, drinking from streams, his body wasting away. At last, he stumbled into sunlight, the edge of the forest before him. He collapsed with relief, convinced he was free. But when he rose, his joy crumbled. For before him was the very same sign he had passed upon entry. His own knife marks were still etched into it. He had not escaped at all. He had returned. He screamed, striking the sign with his fists until his knuckles bled. Then he turned and walked back into the trees. He was never seen again. Another story, even more chilling, comes from a ranger. Equipped with GPS, maps, and radio, he entered a search for missing hikers. For days he transmitted his progress, describing streams, ridges, clearings. His voice was steady, his reports confident. At last, he radioed that he saw the forest's edge. The team outside prepared to welcome him back. Minutes later, his voice broke. He was not at the exit. He was back at his starting point. His transmissions grew frantic, his breathing ragged. "I walked for days," he cried. "I walked. I never stopped. How am I here?" The radio cut off. He was never heard again. The cruelest story of all belongs to a man whose case became infamous among researchers. His name was Kenji. Determined to prove the legends false, he entered the forest alone, equipped with GPS, multiple compasses, maps, and weeks of supplies. He promised to document every step, to show that the vanishings were nothing but myth. For days, he recorded himself. His footage shows him calm, confident, marking his trail with ribbons. He laughed at the stories, mocking the whispers, declaring that science would prevail. He walked with precision, following his GPS closely, his path deliberate. On the 12th day, his camera shows him staggering into sunlight. He raises his hands, shouting with joy. He is free. The forest is behind him. But then he stops. His face shifts. His voice falters. He is staring at something off camera. He turns the lens, and there it is, the entrance. The same cracked signpost, the same moss-covered stones, the same beginning. Kenji collapses, screaming into the earth. His footage ends in sobs. Weeks later, his GPS device was recovered. When analyzed, it revealed something impossible. Though Kenji had walked for 12 days, though his footage showed miles of terrain, Though his exhaustion was undeniable, the GPS showed a single point. He had never moved at all. The forest had trapped him in illusion. His steps were real, his suffering real, his joy real. But the land beneath him had never allowed him to move. And if the forest can trap a man, not only in space, but in perception itself, then what hope remains for anyone who enters? The escape is an illusion. Freedom is a trick. And the cruelest truth of all is not that the forest keeps its victims inside, but that it lets them believe they are free, if only to break them further. The question lingers, heavy as silence itself. How many of the vanished believed they had escaped, only to find themselves back at the beginning? How many screamed at the sight of the entrance before stepping inside again, doomed to repeat eternity? The forest waits, patient. It has no need to chase. For no matter how far its prey runs, no matter how carefully they map or track, every step leads only back to the same place. And when the GPS reveals the truth that they never moved at all, the last fragment of reason collapses. There is no escape, only the forest. The forest was never just a place. It was never just soil, roots, and branches woven together in silence. From the beginning, every whisper, every vanishing, every shadow that twisted against its owner pointed to a darker truth. The forest is not merely cursed. It is alive. It breathes with the wind, sighs with the canopy, waits with a patience no creature of flesh could ever know. And like all living things, it feeds. But its hunger is not for water or sun, not for prey that can be hunted or trapped. Its hunger is for fear, for memory, for the essence of those who enter. For centuries, men thought shadows were illusions, tricks of light bending against the ground. But here, shadows are not illusions at all. They are fragments. They are the parts of us we do not control, the reflection of what we are when stripped of body. And in this place, those fragments are not passive. They are claimed. The monks knew it when they severed shadows in ritual. The soldiers felt it when their silhouettes lingered long after their bodies had fallen. The hikers, the rangers, the researchers, all who vanished felt it too. Their shadows were not taken by accident. They were consumed by something ancient, something vast, something that uses them as fuel. Every footstep left upon its soil is remembered. Every cry that echoes into its branches is absorbed. Every soul that trembles within its borders is kept. That is why the forest whispers. It does not carry wind, it carries memory. It does not echo voices, it repeats them. One scholar, who studied the legends until his mind broke, wrote a final letter that has been hidden for decades. In it, he described his belief that the forest itself is a single organism, a vast consciousness stretching through root and soil, trunk and leaf. He claimed that every shadow severed, every life consumed, was absorbed into its body, becoming part of the endless whole. It is not haunted, he wrote. It is not cursed. It is awake. And the proof lies in the endless loops, the illusions of escape, the shadows that betray their owners. It is not chaos that shapes these torments. It is intention. The forest bends itself not by chance, but by will. It plays with those who enter, pulling them deeper, unraveling their reason until fear blossoms, until despair ripens. Then it feeds, but its feeding is not quick. It does not devour flesh. Flesh is fleeting, gone in days. What it consumes is far slower, far richer. Fear, guilt, sorrow, hope raised and broken again. The forest drinks these emotions like water, savoring them, keeping its prey alive long enough to ripen into despair. That is why survivors speak of hearing their own voices, why they see themselves walking ahead, why they collapse not from wounds, but from the shattering of the mind. They are being tasted, their reflections peeled back, examined, and consumed piece by piece. And when they finally vanish, when they step mid-stride into nothing, when their shadows leave them behind, they are not gone. They are kept. Every vanished soul, every name carved into stone, every scream lost in the canopy. None of it is lost. The forest has them still. That is why the whispers never stop. That is why the shadows wander still. The forest is eternal because it carries them all within it. One ranger who left the service after years of searching for the missing once confessed his final belief. He said that no one is truly lost in the forest. They are still there, every one of them, walking endlessly in silence. He swore he could feel them sometimes, pressing against the air, moving just beyond sight. The forest is full, he whispered, not of trees, of them. If this is true, then every shadow seen moving without a body is not a trick, but a remnant, a fragment of someone who once entered, who once believed they would escape, who now belongs forever to the hunger of the land. But there is something worse still. The villagers who live nearby, who have carried these stories through centuries, speak of nights when the forest does not keep its fragments contained. They speak of evenings when the air grows too still, when the canopy shifts with uneasy rhythm, when the silence feels heavy enough to break. On such nights, they claim to see shadows walking out of the trees. Not people, shadows. Shapes without flesh, outlines without bodies, drifting across the fields and roads, sliding against the walls of homes. The villagers bar their doors, light their candles, whisper prayers to the kami. They do not look directly, for fear that if a shadow meets their eyes, it will follow them inside. Some say the shadows only wander, drifting until dawn when they return to the forest. Others say they search, that they seek warmth, breath, life, that they hunger for what the forest has already taught them to crave. No one knows what happens if one of those shadows finds what it seeks. But the villagers live with the fear generation after generation. Fear not just of the forest, but of what might one day step beyond it. If the forest remembers all who enter, if it keeps every whisper, every shadow, every fragment, then how long before it spills over, unable to contain what it has gathered? How long before the hunger spreads? The forest is eternal. Not because its trees never die, not because its rivers never dry, but because it has filled itself with us, with the lost, with the condemned, with the wanderers who thought they would leave and never did. And as long as fear exists, as long as shadows fall across the earth, the forest will endure. Perhaps that is its greatest cruelty, to remind us that we cannot escape our own darkness. For our shadows follow wherever we go. They stretch with us, bend with us, sleep with us. And if the forest hungers for them, then perhaps the forest does not need us to come to it. Perhaps one day it will come to us. Already the villagers whisper of shadows walking toward their homes. Already they fear that what was once contained has begun to spread. Already the thought lingers. What if the forest does not end at its borders? What if its roots stretch beneath us all, waiting, patient, eternal? The forest does not vanish. The forest does not forgive. The forest does not die. It remembers, and in its memory, it keeps us forever. The forest keeps its silence, but its silence is never empty. Every whisper you heard, every shadow that moved, every vanished soul, none of it is gone. It lingers alive within the roots, within the canopy, within the endless memory of the land. Perhaps it is waiting for the next step, the next voice, the next traveler who dares to enter. Or perhaps it is already closer than we think. If you felt the weight of this tale, if its mystery stayed with you long after the last word, then you already know the forest is not the only place that remembers. Stories remember. They live through those who carry them, who share them, who keep them alive. So let this one live on. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share it with those who walk beside you. And if your heart seeks more journeys into the forgotten and the forbidden, join us. Subscribe so the next story finds you before the shadows do. Because some tales never end. They only wait.